Okay, let's talk about Catelyn IV. Catelyn IV is really fascinating. It is mostly a world building kind of chapter and character building chapter, mainly with regards to Varys and Littlefinger, who were introduced to in this chapter. It's really interesting to me because in George's outline, and again, like the outline is written in October of 1993, and so he's back at writing these first chapters right after writing that outline. And in that outline, Catelyn doesn't head south. Catelyn heads north, goes north of the wall, in this other completely different plot. And so Catelyn's sudden decision to go south to King's Landing and the crazy spontaneity of that matches George R. R. Martin's crazy spontaneity to have Catelyn go south. Like the Catelyn story is very exciting at this moment, and I think it's probably exciting in George's mind because he doesn't know where the Catelyn story is going. He had planned very recently. He's writing this chapter, a couple months after deciding that she was going to go north. Maybe even 1 month after. It's interesting. And so in this chapter, we also start building the world. Now, keep in mind that at this point, George doesn't really know where things are on the map. And so when you hear about things in this chapter, this is him first kind of crafting the world. Like, what does it look like from Winterfell to King's Landing? And so anyway, let's get into it. We will make King's Landing within the hour. Catelyn turned away from the rail and forced herself to smile. Your oarsmen have done well by us, Captain. Each of them shall have a silver stag as a token of my gratitude. This silver stag thing is interesting in that it's put in here to highlight Catelyn's kind of cleverness, her ability to read people, and her general charity and fairness, which she then fails at the end of the chapter. So we're kind of establishing Catelyn one way, and then subverting it, because she can read Captain Morio, and we get this big thing about how she can read Captain Morio, and then she can't read Littlefinger. And so Captain Morio Ternitus followed her with a half bow. Captain Morio is funny. He's given a lot of time here in this chapter, but he's really a nothing character in the end. I don't think he never appears again after this chapter. However, there's some, he's kind of there to introduce us a little bit to foreign culture and just to be a character that Catelyn can read, but that's, he's given a lot of time, considering that he never appears again. Favored her with a half bow. You are far too generous, Lady Stark. The honor of carrying a great lady like yourself is all the reward they need. But they'll take the silver anyway. Mario smiled. As you say. He spoke the common tongue fluently, with only the slightest hint of a Tyrashi accent. He'd been plying the narrow sea for 30 years, he told her, as oarsman, quartermaster, and finally captain of his own trading galleys. The Storm Dancer was his fourth ship, and his fastest, a two-masted galley of 60 oars. Generally speaking, I think the ships in Ice and Fire are way too big, but it kind of matches the castles and everything else. They're way too big for the society that is supposed to be building them. Everything's over the top. But him having a 60-oar ship, I mean, it's either that's 30 oars on one side, or it's 15 oars on a double stack. But it's just a lot of people. There's a lot of people. She had certainly been the fastest ship of the ships available in White Harbor when Catelyn and Sir Roderick Cassel had arrived after their headlong gallop downriver. The Tyrashi were notorious for their avarice, and Sir Roderick had argued for hiring a fishing sloop out of the Three Sisters, but Catelyn had insisted on the galley. It was good that she had. The winds had been against them for much of the voyage, and without the galley's oars, they'd been beating their way. Still be beating their way past the Fingers instead of skimming towards King's Landing and Journey's End. Again, this is like one of the first times we really hear about the geography. And at this point, I'm going to bring up this map because at this point in the story, George had this early map that we found at the Cushing Library. And there's little things. Remember when we were doing the Bran chapter and he talked about going north past the frozen shore, north past the frozen shore. Well, the frozen shore is retconned to be over here or changed to be over here. I don't know if retconn's the right word. So it seems that when he first wrote that Bran going north past the frozen shore, he was perhaps hitting maybe this frozen shore, something going on here. Anyway, we can see that weird things, random things are marked, right? So here we have the Three Sisters and, White Harbor is going to be in here and then passing the Fingers. So George had marked things that he'd actually put in the story on the map. Iron Island's over here, and here's Bear Island in a different place than it should be, it later is. But the point is that Jorah is in the story, and now we're hearing about the Three Sisters and passing by the Fingers, where Littlefinger is from. Interestingly enough, at this point in the map, and he's writing this, Harrenhal is here. That's instead of the Eyrie. And so like where Lysa and the Eyrie are when he's writing this haven't yet been decided, but I'm sure he'll figure it out quickly and probably like switch where Harrenhal would be and things like that. But it's interesting to think that when he established Littlefinger as a Valeman, he hadn't yet decided that Lysa was going to be where the Vale was and things like that, and where the Eyrie was. I mean, at this point, he's talked about her fleeing back to the Vale, but where the Vale is and where the Eyrie is interesting. He hasn't really established that. But anyway. So close, she thought, beneath the linen bandages. Her fingers still throbbed where the dagger had bitten. The pain was her scourge, Catelyn felt, lest she forget. She could not bend the last two fingers on her left hand, and the others would never again be dexterous. Yet that was a small price to pay for Bran's life. A lot of people, comment about how the sharpness of the knife should have sliced right through her fingers, but here they are. Roderick chose that moment to appear on deck. "My good friend," said Morio through his forked green beard. The Tyrashi loved bright colors, even their facial hair. "It is so fine to see you looking better." "Yes," Sir Roderick agreed. "I haven't wanted to die for almost 2 days now." He bowed to Catelyn. "My lady?" He was looking better, a shade thinner than he'd been when they set out from White Harbor, but almost himself again. The strong winds and the bite and the roughness of the narrow sea had not agreed with him, and he'd almost gone over the side when the storm seized them unexpectedly off Dragonstone. Yet somehow he'd clung to a rope until 3 of Morio's men could rescue him and carry him safely below decks. "The captain is just telling me that our voyage is almost at an end," she said. So yeah, again, we hear about the bite and the Fingers, and his entire journey of where Dragonstone is. Here we can see that they've labeled Dragonstone, and so George is figuring out this geography. Roderick I would leave you to discuss your business, Captain Morio said. He bowed and took his leave of them. Now, with Morio given so much time, and later on we're going to find out that Littlefinger and Varys kind of already know stuff. And so there's a question of if Morio is the spy that supplies information to Varys, or if Varys got it from somewhere else. It's only that Morio is just so in the like in everybody's business, and is this character, like, why is he here? What other function would he provide? The galley skimmed the water like a dragonfly, her oars rising and falling in perfect time. Sir Roderick held the rail and looked out over the passing shore. I have not been the most valiant of protectors. Catelyn touched his arm. We are here, Sir Roderick, and safely. That is all that truly matters. Her hand groped beneath her cloak, her fingers stiff and fumbling. The dagger was still at her side. She found she had to touch it now and then to reassure herself. Now we must reach the king's master-at-arms and pray that he can be trusted. Sir Aaron Santigar is a vain man, but an honest one. Sir Roderick's hand went to his face to stroke his whiskers and discovered once again that they were gone. He looked nonplussed. So, just as Morio is the first Tyrashi that we ever meet, and he's kind of now the archetype in which all Tyrashis are going to be based all the way to Daario Naharis, Aaron Santigar is the first Dornishman that we're going to meet in this story. And we don't meet him very much. But you kind of think that everything of people like Oberyn Martell is going to be based on him. So, though we don't hear very much about him. But here he is. He's simply a vain man, but an honest one. I mean, and you can kind of say that's Oberyn Martell as well. Oberyn Martell is pretty straightforward and honest. Probably vain as well. So Roderick's hand went to his face to stroke the whiskers. Okay. He may know the blade, yes, but my lady, the moment we go ashore, we're at risk, and there are those at court who will know you on sight. Catelyn's mouth grew tight. Littlefinger, she murmured. His face swam up before her, a boy's face. Though he'd been a boy, he was a boy no longer. His father had died several years before, so he was Lord Baelish now. Yet they still called him Littlefinger. Her brother Edmure had given him that name long ago at Riverrun. His family's modest holdings were on the smallest of the fingers, and Peter had been slight and short for his age. Now, again, we're getting to these some issues of class and things like this, but Littlefinger is clearly based on the historical figure of Thomas Cromwell. Most people have heard Cromwell. They know of Oliver Cromwell, which was a descendant of his sister. But William Cromwell was an advisor for King Henry VIII, who Robert is based on, being, the big fat character. And Thomas Cromwell also had somewhat modest beginnings and advanced as like a merchant and a banker, and then and a spy, and became one of Henry VIII's advisors. So Littlefinger has a clear kind of historical connection on who he was, and I think it's pretty. I think that Littlefinger was a character that was in the story from the beginning. I mean, we do hear about them mentioning Littlefinger in those early chapters, but his connection with Catelyn, I don't know if that was always going to be something, especially if Catelyn was originally going to go north of the wall. And so here they happen to pass the fingers, and we happen to hear of Littlefinger being from the fingers and all these sorts of things. You can kind of tell that George is like, creating this world here. Sir Roderick cleared his throat. Lord Baelish once, His thought trailed off uncertainly in search of a polite word. Catelyn was past delicacy. He was my father's ward. We grew up together in Riverrun. I thought of him as a brother, but his feelings for me were more than brotherly. When it was announced that I was to wed Brandon Stark, Peter challenged for the right to my hand. It was madness. Brandon was 20, Peter scarcely 15. I had to beg Brandon to spare Peter's life. He let him off with a scar. Afterward, my father sent him away. I've not seen him since. She lifted her face to the spray, as if the brisk wind would blow the memories away. He wrote to me at River Run after Brandon was killed, but I burned the letter unread. By then, I knew that Ned would marry me in his brother's place. Sir Roderick's fingers fumbled once again for a non-existent whiskers. Littlefinger sits on the small council now. Now, this is obviously exposition for us. The characters are kind of acting weird. Like, why should Roderick know anything about Littlefinger and his reputation? You know, searching for a polite word. Like, why should he know anything? You know, like, and why should he judge a man for things he did when he was 15 years old? So long ago and things like this. But this needs to be established as an exposition. You know, I mean, does Roderick know this information or not? Why would he be searching for a polite word if he didn't know the information? But she tells him anyway in a long story, you know. But we need, you know, we as the readers need to know. So I knew he would rise high. Catelyn said. He was always clever, even as a boy, but it was one thing to be clever and another to be wise. I wonder what the years have done to him. High overhead, the far eyes sang out from the ringing. These are sailors up in the ropes. Captain Morio came scrambling across the deck, giving orders, and all around them, the Storm Dancer burst into frantic activity as King's Landing slid into view atop its 3 hills. You'd think it's nothing, but you'd think a ship that big would have a crow's nest, but okay. 300 years ago, Catelyn knew those heights had been covered with forest, and only a handful of fisherfolk had lived on the north shore of the Blackwater Rush, where that deep, swift river flowed into the sea. And again, like, George doesn't think very much about economics. There's no reason that the location where the Blackwater Rush flows into the sea would only have a handful of fisherfolk. That is ridiculous. Like, into such a prime location for trading, it's a bit silly, but fine. That's I always laugh about this. Like, that's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's the same. Salt pans is far too small and things like this. But now the city covered the shores as far as Catelyn could see. Manses and arbors and granaries, brick storehouses and timbered inns and merchant stalls, taverns and graveyards and brothels. Normally George uses lich yards, but sometimes graveyards, all piled on another. She could hear the clamor of the fish market even at this distance. Between the buildings were broad roads lined with trees, wandering crookback streets and alleys so narrow that 2 men could not walk abreast. That's narrow. I don't know how many alleys are like that. I've been to a lot of places and seen a lot of old towns. An alley like where 2 men can't walk abreast. Visenius Hill, but again, everything has to be extreme here. Visenius Hill was crowned by the Sept of Baelor with its 7 crystal towers. So it's hard to say how much George goes back for, but we know that the addition of across the city on the hill of Rainy stood the blackened walls of the Dragon Pit. So Aegon's sisters, Aegon is not made a polygamist. Aegon the Conqueror is not made a polygamist until fairly late in the writing of A Game of Thrones. It's a kind of a last-minute decision that George decides to suddenly make Aegon a polygamist. I think it's because he's into A Clash of Kings at this point when Game of Thrones is heading to publication, and he comes up with the three heads of the dragon prophecy and things like that. So he's well into A Clash of Kings when Game of Thrones is getting published. So he kind of goes back and makes Aegon a polygamist with two sister wives. He only had one sister wife originally, and this was fairly late. Like I'm talking like into 1995. He's got Aegon the Conqueror has one wife, and then in publication of Game of Thrones in 96, it's switched. So when we hear about Visenia's Hill and the Hill of Rhaenys, we're not sure if this is added later, like he goes back and adds more color, or if he was just naming people and he had no idea who these people were, Rhaenys he probably knew because Rhaenys, is named is Rhaegar's daughter, but Visenya is only named as Visenia's Hill, like Visenya throughout a Game of Thrones. So we don't know if he really knew at this point when running these words if he knew that this was a sister wife. Anyway, across the city, Rhaenys stood black in walls of Dragon Pit. Huge dome collapsed in its ruins. Its bronze doors closed for a century. Well more than a century. But the Street of Sisters ran between them, straight as an arrow. So now it's establishing Visenya and Rhaenys as sisters, but are they both the wives of Aegon at this point? Or is this, again, George could have gone back and been adding color. The city's walls rose in the distance, high and strong. 100 quays lined the waterfront. Oh my God. See, everything has to be extreme. 100 quays. A quay is a big stone dock. Okay. I mean, you start thinking about like, how big is that stone dock? Like from one end to the other, like, 20 feet. And then you're giving 20 feet to like the water on each side for ships, for small ships to come in. We're not even talking about big ships. And so you'd be like, okay, so that's, in order to have 100 quays, you'd have to have 6,000 feet. So like the port would stretch for a mile, like there's like real big, like everything's extreme here. And that's if they're all kind of small. 100 quays. That's crazy. And the harbor was crowded with ships. Deep water fishing boats and river runners came and went. Ferrymen pulled back and forth across the Blackwater Rush. Trading galleys unloaded goods from Bravos and Pentos and Lice. Catelyn spied the queen's ornate barge tied up beside a fat-bellied whaler from the port of Ibn, its hull black with tar, while upriver a dozen lean golden warships rested in their cribs, sails furled, and cruel iron rams lapping at the water. The rams are lapping at the water? You'd think the rams would be pretty high. Anyway, I don't know. And above it all, frowning down from Aegon's high hill, was the Red Keep. 7 huge drum towers crowned with iron ramparts, an immense grim barbican, vaulted halls and covered bridges, barracks and dungeons and granaries, massive curtain walls studded with archers' nests, and all fashioned of pale red stone. I mean, of course, this is going to be a Catelyn chapter. Like, she's so poetic, and she's going to go on and on about this. This couldn't have been done, for example, with Ned. She kind of needed. I mean, the only character that would describe things like this would be Tyrion or Catelyn. Aegon the Conqueror had commanded it built. His son Maegor the Cruel had seen it completed. Afterwards, he had taken the heads of every stonemason, woodworker, and builder who labored on it. Only the blood of the dragon would ever know the secrets of the fortress the Dragon Lords had built, he vowed, adding to the cruelty of Maegor the Cruel, and having all these secret passages. Yet now the banners that flew from its battlements were golden, not black, and where the three-headed dragon had once breathed fire, now placed the crowned stag of House Baratheon. A high-masted swan ship from the Summer Isles was beating out of the port, its white sails huge with wind. The storm dancer moved past it, pulling steadily offshore. "My lady," Sir Roderick said, "I've thought of how best to proceed while I lay abed. You must not enter the castle. I will go in your stead and bring Sir Aaron to you in some safe place." She studied the old knight as the galley drew near to the pier. Moria was shouting in the vulgar Valyrian of the free cities. So, you would be as much at risk as I would. Sir Roderick smiled. "I think not. I looked at my reflection in the water earlier and scarcely recognized myself. My mother was the last person to see me without whiskers, and she is 40 years dead. I believe I am safe enough, my lady." So he has shaved his whiskers. He's clean shaven. No one can recognize him. Morio bellowed a command. The 60 oars lifted from the river and reversed and backed water. The galley slowed. Another shout. The oars slid back inside the hull. As they thumped against the dock, Tairashi's seamen leapt down to tie up. Morio came bustling up, all smiles. "King's Landing, my lady, as you did command. And never has a ship made a swifter or surer passage. Will you be needing assistance to carry your things to the castle?" "We shall not be going to the castle. Perhaps you could suggest an inn, someplace clean and comfortable, and not too far from the river." The Tairashi fingered his forked green beard. "Just so. I know several establishments that might suit your needs." Just so. We hear this one a lot in the free cities. "Yet first, if I may be so bold, there's a matter of the second half of the payment we agreed upon, and of course the extra silver you were so kind as to promise. 60 stags, I believe it was, for the oarsmen." Catelyn reminded him. "Oh, of a certainty, though perhaps I should hold it for them until we return to Tyrosh, for the sake of their wives and children. If you give them the silver here, my lady, they will dice it away or spend it all for a night's pleasure. There are worse things to spend money on," Sir Roderick put in. "Winter is coming." "A man must make his choices," Catelyn said. Yeah, it's interesting that, like, we have established that winter is coming as their words. Yes, that was established in Catelyn 1. In fact, only in Catelyn chapters does winter is coming appear. It's kind of funny. Oh wait, no, I that's not true. I searched for Catelyn. Bran talks about winter is coming and stuff like this, and Arya. Okay, everybody talks about winter is coming, is all over the place. My mistake. So this is the very kind of interesting thing. A man must make his own choices, Catelyn said. They earn the silver. How they spend it is no concern of mine. Now it's a little. Now, granted, it's on the one hand, Catelyn clearly is seeing that Morio is trying to steal all of his men's money, and she doesn't want the men's money to be stolen, and so she wants to be fair and just, which just tells a lot about who Catelyn is. But this considering how existential the story gets with Catelyn and Brienne and Jaime, I do wonder about this line: "A man must make his own choices." So, "As you say, my lady," Morio replied, bowing and smiling. Just to be sure, Catelyn paid the oarsmen herself, a stag to each man, and a copper to the 2 men who carried their chests halfway up Visenius Hill to the inn that Morio had suggested. It was a rambling old place on Eel Alley. George R.R. Martin thinks eels are really creepy and puts them in a lot of his stories. The woman who owned it was a sour crone with a wandering eye who looked over them suspiciously and bit the coin that Catelyn offered to her to make sure it was real. Her rooms were large and airy. though, and Morio swore that her fish stew was the most savory in all the Seven Kingdoms. Best of all, she had no interest in their names. I think it is best if you stay away from the common room, Sir Roderick said after they had settled in. Even in a place like this, one never knows who may be watching. He wore ringmail, dagger, longsword under a dark cloak, with a hood that could be pulled over his head. I will be back before nightfall with Sir Aaron, he promised you. Rest now, my lady. Catelyn was tired. The voyage had been long and fatiguing, and she was no longer as young as she had been. Her windows opened on the alleys and rooftops with a view of the Blackwater beyond. She watched Sir Roderick set off, striding briskly through the busy streets until he was lost in the crowds, then decided to take his advice. The bedding was stuffed with straw instead of feathers, but she had no trouble falling asleep. She awoke to a pounding on the door. Catelyn sat up sharply. Outside the window, the rooftops of King's Landing were red in the light of the setting sun. She had slept longer than she intended. A fist hammered at the door again, and a voice called out, "Open, in the name of the king!" "A moment," she called out. She wrapped herself in her cloak. The dagger was on the bedside table. She snatched it up before she unlatched the heavy wooden door. The men who pushed into the room wore black ringmail and golden cloaks of the city watch. Their leader smiled at the dagger in her hand and said, "No need for that, my lady. We're here to escort you to the castle." "By whose authority?" she said. He showed her a ribbon. Catelyn felt her breath catch in her throat. The seal was a mockingbird in gray wax. "Peter," she said. "So soon. Something must have happened to Sir Roderick." She looked at the guardsman. "Do you know who I am?" "No, milady," he said. "Milord Littlefinger said only to bring you to him and see that you are not mistreated." Catelyn nodded. "You may wait outside while I dress." So right from the start, we're getting this idea that Littlefinger has control over the gold cloaks. This, of course, comes in much later on when Ned is betrayed. But we kind of connect that all to like him buying off Janis Slint. But here we kind of see that these connections with the gold cloaks are early. He has control over them. And you know, we're first in the question of how did they find out? How did they find out that she was here? Because she didn't give names to the old lady. It seems like, you know, unless Catelyn thinks something happened with Roderick, but it seems more likely that's something that related to Morio. She bathed her hands in the basin and wrapped them in clean linen. Her fingers were thick and awkward, and she struggled to lace up her bodice. I have to say, this chapter definitely has like later George R.R. Martin world building and slowness. Like it's the chapters like up until this point have just been boom, 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 and here it's just descriptions of the city and her wrapping up wounds and all sorts of things. How could Littlefinger have known she was here? Sir Roderick would have never told him. Old as he might have been, but he was stubborn and loyal to the fault. Were they too late? Had the Lannisters reached King's Landing before her? No, if that were true, Ned would be here too, and surely he would have come to her. How? Then she thought, Morio. The Tyrashi knew who they were and where they were. Damn him. She'd hoped he'd gotten a good price for the information. And I would guess that she's correct here with that Morio did it. But I think this might come up later. It's been a long time. They had brought her a horse for her, and the lamps were being lit along the street as they set out, and Catelyn felt the eyes of the city as she rode, surrounded by the guards in the golden cloaks. As they reached the Red Keep, the portcullis was down and the great gates sealed for the night. The castle windows were alive with flickering lights. The guardsmen left their mounts outside the walls and escorted her through a narrow postern door and then up endless steps to a tower. Oh man, they really take their time. They really take their time in this chapter. He was alone in the room, seated at a heavy wooden table, an oil lamp beside him as he wrote. When they ushered her inside, he set down his pen and looked at her. Littlefinger is always writing these letters, and you're like, who are you writing to? When they ushered her inside, she set down his pen and looked at her. Cat, he said quietly. What? Why have I been brought to you here in this fashion? He rose and gestured brusquely to the guards. Leave us. The men departed. You're not mistreated, I trust, he said after they'd gone. I gave firm instructions. He noticed her bandages. Your hands. Catelyn ignored the implied question. I'm not accustomed to being summoned like a serving wench, she said icily. As a boy, you still knew the meaning of courtesy. I've angered you, milady. That was never my intent. He looked contrite. The look brought back vivid memories for Catelyn. He had always been a sly child, but after his mischiefs, he always looked contrite. It was a gift he had. The years had not changed him much. Peter had been a small boy, and he'd grown into a small man, an inch or two shorter than Catelyn, slender and quick, with his sharp features, he remembered, and the same laughing gray-green eyes. He had a little pointed chin beard now, and the threads of silver in his dark hair, though he was still shy of 30. They went well with the silver mockingbird that fastened his cloak. Even as a child, he had always loved his silver. He was still shy of 30, but Catelyn is, 34 at this point in the story? It might be 33. I'm trying to guess. Catelyn is born in about 264, 265, and it's currently 298. So, she's, about 33, and he's 4 years younger, shy of 30, 3 or 4 years younger. Yeah. Even as a child, he'd always loved his silver. How'd you know I was in the city? She asked him. Lord Varys knows all, Peter said with a sly smile. He'll be joining us shortly, but I wanted to see you alone first. It had been too long, Cat. How many years? Catelyn ignored his familiarity. There were some more important questions. So it was the king's spider who found me. Littlefinger winced. You don't want to call him that. He's very sensitive. Comes of being a eunuch, I imagine. Nothing happens in the city without Varys knowing. Oftentimes, he knows about it before it happens. He has informants everywhere. His little birds, he calls them. One of his little birds heard about your visit. Thankfully, Varys came to me first. And so here, maybe there's doubt on if it's Morio, or if it's just, a little bird in the port, like watching, or a little bird at Winterfell, things like this. Maybe we'll never find out. But it does just seem like it's like the easiest answer is Morio, but here Littlefinger's calling you to question even that. Why you? He shrugged. Why not me? I am Master of Coin, the king's own counselor. Selmy and Lord Renly rode north to meet Robert, and Lord Stannis has gone to Dragonstone, leading only Maester Pycelle and me. I was the obvious choice. I was ever a friend to your sister Lysa. Varys knows that. So this chapter in general has perplexed fans because Littlefinger and Varys who are on opposing sides. Varys doesn't necessarily know what Littlefinger's side is, but they're not allies. They're competitors in the Game of Thrones. And yet this is a weird chapter where they seem to team up and even hide information, and the dagger thing is the main thing. But here Varys at some point finds out that Catelyn's on her way. Maybe he has a spy at Winterfell. Maybe he has a spy on the ship. Maybe it's Morio. Maybe he has a spy coming when they got off the ship. It seems like it should be someone who has more detail, because later Varys knows about the dagger. So I want to say it's somebody who's been around Catelyn and Roderick talking, or someone at Winterfell to find out about the dagger, rather than just, somebody at the gates or somebody at the docks. So it's somebody close. I think Morio makes the most sense, but that on those weeks they were on the ship, he heard something. Does Varys know about? Lord Varys knows everything except why you're here. Why are you here? But he does know about the dagger. That's the weird thing, right? Wife is allowed to yearn for her husband, and if a mother needs her daughter close, who can tell her no? Littlefinger laughed. Oh, very good, my lady. But please, don't expect me to believe that. I know you too well. What were the Tully words again? Her throat was dry. Family, duty, honor, she recited stiffly. He did know her too well. Family, duty, honor, he echoed. All of which required you to remain in Winterfell, where our hand left you. No, my lady, something has happened. This sudden trip of yours bespeaks a certain urgency. I beg of you, let me help. Old sweet friends should never hesitate to rely upon each other. There was a swift knock on the door. Enter, Littlefinger called out. Yeah. And we kind of know that George had some confusion over the assassination plot of John Arryn and who was responsible and things like this. So I don't, it may very well be that all of this is George writing chaotically rather than a master plan. But because again, like trying to figure out and think about what Littlefinger would be thinking. Like, would Littlefinger know about the dagger? And if not, the urgency that Littlefinger, the urgency of Catelyn coming here, he must assume it would be the letter. Knowing all the information that we know all the way to through dance. It should be Littlefinger told Lysa to write that letter. The letter went to Catelyn, and now she's with urgency. She's heading down here to see Ned. He must assume it's about that. If he doesn't know about the dagger, but I guess he would know about the dagger, The man who stepped through the door was plump, perfumed, powdered, and as hairless as an egg. Eunuchs were advisors in the Middle East and in China at various points in history. The idea being that if you castrated a man, he wouldn't rival you in power because he has no children to try to usurp you for. Emperors and kings and often sultans, they would usually pass the world on to their children. And so the idea would be that a eunuch has no children to pass everything on to. So why usurp the throne or whatever? This was the thought. But there's no particular historical eunuch that we can pin Varys on being, unlike, say, Thomas Cromwell, who is clearly Littlefinger. He wore a vest of woven gold thread over a loose gown of purple silk, and on his feet were pointed slippers of soft velvet. Lady Stark, he said, taking her hand in both of his, to see you again after so many years is such joy. His flesh was soft and moist, and his breath smelled of lilacs. Oh, your poor hands. Now he purposely reached out for her hands in order to have this. Have you burned yourself, sweet lady? Your fingers are so delicate. My good Maester Pycelle makes a marvelous salve. Shall I send you a jar? So, Varys clearly knows about the cuts. Catelyn slid her fingers from his grasp. I thank you, my lord, but my own Maester Luwin has already seen to my hurts. Varys bobbed his head. I was grievous sad to hear about your son, and him so young. The gods are cruel. So this is him saying that, he has some spies at Winterfell who at least communicated to him the fall from the tower. On that we agree, Lord Varys. The title was but a courteous the title was but a courtesy due to him as a council member. Varys was a lord of nothing but the spider web, a master of none but his whisperers. The eunuch spread his soft hands. George R. Martin is obsessed with hands. The eunuch having soft hands instead of calloused hands is a big deal. Those means he doesn't do physical labor or fight or carry a sword. On more than that, I hope, sweet lady, I have great esteem for your husband, our new hand, and I know we do both love King Robert. Yes, she was forced to say, for a certainty. Never has a king been so beloved as our Robert, quipped Littlefinger. He smiled slyly. At least in Lord Varys' hearing. So that's the kind of this interesting idea is what, Littlefinger seems to be claiming that there's already people that are seeking to overthrow Robert by sarcastically saying that never has there been a king as beloved as Robert. Clearly, he's recognizing that Robert has a lot of enemies, whether it be Targaryens across the sea or Dornish or whatever. And that's the weird thing, at least in Lord Varys' hearing, which is, of course, so he's saying that Lord Varys, this is quite a saying now that I'm thinking about the sarcasm of this. So Lord Varys' job is to report threat. He's a spy master, so he's big part of his job is to report threats to the king. And here he says, never has a king been so beloved as Robert, at least in Lord Varys' hearing. So despite the fact that we, as the reader, know that there are threats to Robert existing in the world, Littlefinger is saying that Varys is not reporting them. Which is a kind of bold thing to say about Varys. Like, he's saying, like, oh, I know something about you. One could read this like, yeah, I know that you're trying to overthrow Robert. Like, one could really read into that. That's a second great line. So that's what Littlefinger has hanging over Varys, huh? Well, good lady, or at least he's making Varys think that. Good lady, Varys said with great solicitude. There are men in the free cities with wondrous healing powers. Say only the word, and I will send for one of your dear Bran. We'll send for one for your dear Bran. Maester Lewin is doing all that can be done for Bran, she told him. She would not speak of Bran, not here, not with these men. She trusted Littlefinger only a little, and Varys not at all. She would not let them see her grief. Lord Baelish tells me that I have to thank you for bringing me here. Varys giggled like a little girl. Oh yes, I suppose I'm guilty. I hope you forgive me, kind lady. He eased himself down into the seat and put his hands together. I wonder if we might trouble you to show us the dagger. So Varys admits that he's the one that has the spies, and he clearly knew she was coming, and he knew about the dagger. So, Morio makes the most sense. Catelyn Stark stared at the eunuch in stunned disbelief. He was a spider, she thought wildly, an enchanter or worse. He knew things no one could possibly know, unless... What have you done to Sir Roderick? She demanded. Littlefinger was lost. I feel rather like the knight who arrived at the knight who arrived at the battle without his lance. What dagger are we talking about? Who is Sir Roderick? Is Littlefinger playing dumb here? He doesn't know it's hard to believe he doesn't know who Sir Roderick is. He would be studying the houses. And what dagger are we talking about? Maybe. Sir Roderick Cassel is master at arms at Winterfell, Varys informed them. I assure you, Lady Stark, nothing at all has been done with the good knight. I did call here early this afternoon. He visited with Sir Aaron Santigar in the armory, and they talked of a certain dagger. About sunset, they left the castle together and walked to that dreadful hovel where you were staying. They are still here, drinking in the common room, waiting for your return. Sir Roderick was very distressed to find you gone. How could you know that? The whispering of little birds, Varys said, smiling. I know things, sweet lady. That is the nature of my service. So he has a spy, now tailing Roderick. So this is interesting. So it wasn't like, we're all also narrowing things down. Like, he's claiming that they talked in the armory. Okay. Maybe it's not Morio. I'm going to go back and say Morio makes a lot of sense. But now, if Varys is in the walls, all he has to do is listen to Aaron Santigar and Roderick talk of everything about this dagger while hiding in the walls. And then when they leave, like, he's got all the information. So maybe Morio is innocent. I'm sorry. I'm going to go back and just say Littlefinger, like Varys was in the walls. Like, he was in the walls of the armory and he heard them talk, and that was it. He's like, who's this new guy coming in? He doesn't even need all of these people. He just, and he could clearly be making up the fact that they're drinking in the common room and distressed. I mean, that's just what you can assume. Now the simplest answer, I think, is Varys hid in the walls. I know things. That's the nature of my service. Do you have the dagger with you? Catelyn pulled it out from beneath her cloak and threw it down on the table in front of him. Here, perhaps your little birds will whisper the name of the man it belongs to. So now, maybe Littlefinger, does Littlefinger know about the dagger? I mean, if we're assuming that Joffrey sent the cat's paw, Littlefinger might be honest, but, or if Mance did it, Littlefinger would, again, wouldn't know. It's only if Littlefinger planned the cat's paw could he be lying here. Perhaps your little birds will whisper the name of the man it belongs to. Varys lifted the knife with exaggerated delicacy and ran a thumb along its edge. Blood welled, and he let out a squeal and dropped the dagger back on the table. Careful, Catelyn, it's sharp. Nothing holds an edge like Valyrian steel, Littlefinger said as Varys sucked at his bleeding thumb and looked at Catelyn with sudden admonition. I mean, Varys did that on purpose. I mean, that's ridiculous. You should know. But of course, now they all know it's Valyrian steel. But maybe this is a tell that Littlefinger knew. It's supposedly a dull knife, but now Littlefinger's looking at it and instantly thinks it's Valyrian steel. Again, that we have this contradictory information. Like, Roderick tells us that anyone could look at that dagger and figure out it's Valyrian steel, but then later we find out that no, it's dull, and not everyone would know that. So it's certainly not Joffrey. Littlefinger hefted the knife lightly, and his hand tested the grip. He flipped it in the air, caught it again with the other hand. Such sweet balance. You want to find the owner. Is that the reason for the visit? You have no need for Sir Aaron for that, my lady. You should have come to me. And if I had, what would you have told me? I would have told you that there is only one knife like this at King's Landing. And yet Joffrey picked it at random because it was dull. Like, it's a special knife. It's a special dagger. He grasped the blade between thumb and forefinger, drew it back over his shoulders, and threw it across the room with a practiced flick of his wrist. It struck the door and buried itself deep in the oak, quivering. It's mine. And all of this plays with the idea that he's familiar with the dagger. He's playing with it like he knows it, like he knows the balance, throwing it as if he's thrown this thing before. Yours? It made no sense. Peter had not been at Winterfell. Until the tourney on Prince Joffrey's name day, he said, crossing the room to wrench the dagger from the wood. I backed Sir Jaime in the jousting, along with half the court. Peter's sheepish grin made him look half a boy again. When Loras Tyrell unhorsed him, many of us were a trifle poorer. Sir Jaime lost 100 golden dragons. The queen lost an emerald pendant, and I lost my knife. Her grace got the emerald back, but the winner kept the rest. Who? Her mouth dry with fear. Her fingers ached with remembrance. The imp, said Littlefinger as Lord Varys washed her face. Tyrion Lannister. So the what a chapter, especially the ending, which because everybody just kind of is so stumped over, right? Like, does Littlefinger know about the dagger? And if not, he certainly came up with this like moment of chaos right here by pinning it on Tyrion. Great improvisation, but also like you're giving all of this information to Varys, who's a spy master, who should be able to figure out that that's not true. Varys could easily go around talking to people about those bets and figure out whose dagger this is and things like that. And no, it's not Tyrion's. Now, we are going to get back to this question. Is Tyrion a resident of King's Landing or not? Here, he seems like a resident because he talks about that it was all of court was betting along with half court. I mean, it could be that Tyrion only visited for tourneys. Well, I guess we'll just keep looking for evidence of where Tyrion lives, but he talks about it like it's court celebrating Prince Joffrey's name day and the tourney, and that maybe because we know Loras Tyrell is at court, but did Tyrion travel from Casterly Rock for this tourney? Maybe, I don't know. We'll keep trying to answer that question, but I'm trying to think like, Littlefinger already has the chaos that he caused with, he already has the chaos that he caused with the letter, blaming the Lannisters on the murder of Jon Arryn. And then he has someone seems to have tried to murder Bran. And so he improvises and wants to double down and make it a Lannister as well. But it's such a risky move, because it's only that the Catelyn runs into Tyrion at the crossroads that allows all of the sorts of things to happen after that. Had they missed each other, which was the probable situation, they would have eventually kind of been like asking questions about who this dagger belonged to. I mean, a logical person would just start asking questions on who this dagger belonged to. Was it Tyrion's dagger? And then be like, no, this wasn't Tyrion's dagger. Whose dagger was it? Oh, it was Robert's dagger. Oh, I mean, even Aaron Santagar. I mean, I guess this, like, oh gosh, Varys might, like, Aaron Santagar wants to take a look at this dagger. We don't know if Aaron Santagar is gonna recognize it. Like, if Aaron Santagar recognizes it, it's immediately known to be Robert's dagger. It's only by chance that Aaron Santagar can't say if he recognizes it or not, right? It's such chaos. Fans have been riddling over this like ending. Like, what is Littlefinger thinking? It's so freaking risky what he's doing, and it's so odd that he's doing it in front of Varys, that Varys might be just like, what are you doing? Like, trying to make sense of it all. And going back, I just don't think maybe like seeing how the dagger riddle played out and it being Joffrey's in the end and everything. Like, if we're really supposed to believe that it was Joffrey's and Peter did actually know nothing about the dagger, and Varys is only finding out about the dagger because he was hiding in the walls, listening to Aaron Santagar and Roderick talk. And like, what would Varys be thinking? I guess Varys doesn't want to turn in Littlefinger because Littlefinger is claiming he knows knowledge about Varys's plans by saying like, oh yeah, he's a great spy. I mean, maybe it's so confusing. I can't even explain like all of the different threads of what's going on here, but I don't know. Maybe other people see it differently. I mean, if you see it differently, like, let me know in the comments. Like that. Like, no, this completely makes sense. This is what Littlefinger is doing. This is what Varys is doing. How far back they knew about the dagger? Because I think now, if not Morio, Varys is just hiding in the walls, and no one knows anything about the dagger. The dagger was actually like a secret. Unless Littlefinger sent the cat's paw. And this all plays into his plan. And he knew that Catelyn was going to head south after that. But then how did he know that Varys was going to... Here's the other thing is say Littlefinger, it is Littlefinger's, like Littlefinger sent the cat's paw. And he knew that after that, Catelyn would be heading to King's Landing. He figured all that out, even though it's kind of illogical that she's coming to King's Landing. She should have just sent Roderick by himself. Because in the end, it's Roderick doing everything by himself anyway. But say he figures out that Catelyn's going to head south. How did he know that Varys was going to alert him to Catelyn's arrival? None of it makes sense in a planning sense. Like, there's no way that Littlefinger could know all of these things would happen. There's no, like, every piece of it is just like Littlefinger being massively lucky that Catelyn chooses to come to. Like, it's just massively lucky that that she chooses to come to King's Landing, that Varys alerts him for some reason. And that she tells him this lie, and she happens to run into Tyrion, happens to not share this information with, say, the king or Robert and all these other people, and instead goes on by herself and happens to run into Tyrion. It's just, there's so much luck here. There's just so much luck. That you have to view it as Littlefinger improvising, because there's no way he could know all of this. But then if he's improvising, he's damn lucky. He's just so damn lucky that Varys doesn't turn around and tell the king, that Varys doesn't turn around and tell Tyrion, that, you know, all these other things. And Varys' master plan, I mean, later, at this point, Illyrio has not told him to slow down, but no, it's Varys that wants to slow down. Varys is like, things are going too fast, slow things down. I can't juggle everything. But then, and so he tells Illyrio to speed things up. So Varys' plan, like, why would Varys want to cause this conflict? He just figures that, why does he bring Littlefinger along? Like, why does he know that Littlefinger is going to cause chaos? Like, oh, this is a crazy situation. Let's throw Littlefinger in here and see what he does. In the end, looking at it from Littlefinger or Varys' perspective, none of it really, the motivations don't really make sense. There's too many factors to keep track of, and too much luck. And so, in the end, I just have to step back and say, this is a chapter that George R.R. Martin wanted to introduce Littlefinger and Varys in, because these are major players. And he wanted to eventually have the dagger thing happen because he wants Littlefinger and Catelyn to run into each other and it to be a conflict. And so I think it's merely, he's using the chapter to introduce two characters and it's just, he doesn't care that it doesn't make any sense. Like, it doesn't matter that Varys, like, brings Littlefinger. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why they'd want to talk to him alone, to Catelyn alone. Like, he just wanted to do it. He just wanted to introduce them, and he wanted to introduce this conflict. Because, man, the fandom has obsessed over this ending of this chapter for a while and been like, what are they doing? And I don't think there is anything to it. And, you know, even thinking about, like, again, like Catelyn III and her sudden decision to come to King's Landing, which also doesn't make any sense. Like, why not send Sir Roderick by himself? You were really focused on being with Bran because you didn't want him to die while you were gone. Why uselessly head to King's Landing when you could just send Sir Roderick? Yeah, I think this is, in the end, I think George is just, you know, he's going really fast now, and he just wants to establish characters and get the plot going and have stuff happen, and that he's not really obsessed with making sense of it all as he is in later books. You know, like I think in later books he does think about all of that, and the fandom is certainly obsessed with it. But I think here in Game of Thrones, he's just not concerned with it. He's just like, I need the plot to go forward, and I'll figure it out later. I'll fix it later. I'll fix it in post. Oh man. Anyway, I rambled a bit at the end here. Trying to figure out like what Varys and Littlefinger are thinking. I don't think any of it makes sense. Littlefinger just acts so reckless here, as if he has everything planned. But I mean, it's not like, you know, a day went by or something where he like thought something out and calculated it. He was just like, no, that's my like, what dagger are we talking about? Oh, that's my dagger, and I won it from Tyrion. Like, so reckless that you're going to later happen to run into. You know, you're going to and I'm going to use this same conflict to try to manipulate Ned, who for some reason doesn't talk to Robert about it, you know. So much luck. And I don't even know what Varys is doing. Why would he bring Littlefinger along? Doesn't make any sense. But the story has to move forward. And it is exciting, obviously, to be like, oh, whose dagger is this? Tyrion's. That is pretty shocking. We all buy it at the time on the first read. Anyway, thank you. I will talk to you guys soon.